This question tells us some information about Lewis, that he currently lives in big city where he makes $60,000 a year, and we're thinking about moving him to medium city. Well, in big city, the cost per square foot of housing is $30 annually, and he ends up buying 1,000 square feet of housing, so he spends $30,000 on housing, and he spends $30,000 on everything else, which he only spends money on two things, so his budget of $60,000 must equal his spending on housing and everything else, and we check and see that it does. He spends $30,000 on housing, $30,000 on everything else, that equals $60,000. The only difference between big city and medium city is the cost per square foot of housing. In medium city, it's only $10 per square foot. So the first question is asking, how much does the same bundle that was initially chosen in big city cost in medium city? Well, in big city, we know that he bought 1,000 square feet, and he spent $30,000 on everything else. So in medium city, that same bundle would cost, well, now it's $10 per square foot, so 10 times 1,000 plus the 30,000, and we see in medium city that bundle would cost $40,000. The next question says, at the bundle chosen in big city, but the housing price in medium city, which is true? And the answer is, Lewis is willing to give up more of everything else for another unit of housing than it costs. So let's dissect this statement. It's kind of confusing. You need to really understand this because I know it's going to be on the test, so pay attention and take good notes here. This is what that sentence is saying. It's saying that the marginal rate of substitution of housing for everything else is greater than the price ratio of housing to everything else. So when it's in this form, it's crucial that you understand that the order here matters. The marginal rate of substitution of H for E, so H comes first, that's how much we value it. And this statement is saying right now we need more housing because we value housing at a greater level than the market will let us switch it for everything else. So we value that exchange of housing for everything else more than the market will let us switch it for. So at this point, we're going to buy more housing, or another way to say that is we're going to buy less of everything else. So you can think of that in both ways. And that brings me to the next point, is this is another way to write the exact same thought. The marginal rate of substitution of E to H is less than the price ratio of E to H. So any form that you like to see it in, write it in that form. You can always algebraically manipulate it to match an answer choice on the test, but just make sure you understand how to say that and how to interpret it. Let's see how we arrived at that answer a little closer. In big city, we know that he was maximizing his utility. So the marginal rate of substitution of H to E was equal to the price ratio, right? He was maximizing utility. Well, in medium city, we know that the price of H, which is the rent per square foot, decreased. It became less expensive, went from $30 to $10. So we see that if it used to be equal and then pH got smaller, it must be that the marginal rate of substitution of H for E is now larger than the price ratio. So that's another way we can look at this. The next question says, assuming no amenity differences, how much must Lewis earn in medium city to reach the level of utility he enjoyed in big city, which we can see was represented by indifference curve 1? Well, first let's draw the new budget line in medium city where rent is $10 per square foot. So let's assume that we were still making $60,000 a year. Well, now we'd be able to buy still $60,000 of everything else, but we'd be able to buy 6,000 square feet of housing. So our line would shift to this new blue line. To find out how much we'd have to pay him in medium city now, we need to shift that blue line to be tangent to that same indifference curve, which is indifference curve 1. So we move it over, and now to see how much we'd have to pay him, well, we can look at this a couple of different ways, but basically look at both of the intercepts, the y-intercept and the x-intercept, these two yellow dots, and that will tell you the salary needed. So it's easy to look at the e-intercept for instance, because it's already in thousands of dollars, and we see that $35,000 is the amount we'd have to pay him. Now that's not how much he'd buy of everything else, that's just the salary. He'd buy some amount of everything else in the middle of that, and some amount of housing. But the way to find the salary is to look at the intercept. The next question says, now assume the amenity level is higher in big city, Lewis must reach the indifference curve 2 in medium city to enjoy the utility level afforded by indifference curve 1 in big city. So now he needs to reach that farther out indifference curve. The question asks, how much must Lewis earn in medium city to reach the level of utility he enjoyed in big city? Well, we remember this was his budget line. So to reach that second indifference curve, we just need to push it out a little bit. And we see, again, looking at the intercepts, that $40,000 is the amount that we need to pay him with this new amenity value added in. So this question is kind of tricky because you think you're going to be solving it mathematically with numbers. So it's very important to understand the graphs because in this question we're only relying on graphs to answer all these questions. So really do a lot of practice and a lot of familiarizing yourself with these graphs and how they work. The last question says, if Lewis makes just enough money to reach indifference curve 2 in medium city, the answer to the previous question, how many square feet of housing does he consume? Well, here we see our budget line drawn, and to find how much he consumes of each thing, we look at where that line barely intersects or is tangent to the indifference curve, which is at this red dot. So we see at that red dot, he's consuming 2,000 units of housing or 2,000 square feet of housing and roughly $20,000 of everything else.